Hey there, welcome to the Eurostep, a Milwaukee Bucks podcast, proudly a part of the Eurostep Podcast Network, ever expanding, and the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I am Ty Windish, one of your hosts, and I am joined, as always, by the persuasive, it's not really what I meant to look for, inquisitive Rohan Kadi. Rohan, how's it going?
I'm doing well. It's playoff time, Ty. We've wrapped
Yeah,
up the regular season. The Bucks' final game against the Cavaliers was a loss. It was a little bit of a dud. It was a fun game for basketball sickos like myself,
honestly,
but it's
like that
over.
point in the fourth quarter when they went on that run, when they actually started trying on
They cut it to
defense.
12.
It was a real game for a second there. So this episode we interviewed people who cover four of the premier threats in the playoffs. This is a playoff primer. It does not cover the Bucks' first round opponent, the Chicago Bulls. We will bring you an episode doing that later this week, but we wanted to start by looking at, the cream of the crop, the El Jefes, the bosses besides the Bucks in the Eastern Conference. So we are tackling four of those teams here today. But I was on an interviewing with one of our fine guests who will announce in a second here. And I was like, I might just stop the interview if this game gets any closer because, maybe the Bucks are gonna win after all and be the 2 seed, no matter what happens with Boston and Memphis. But unfortunately, the Cavs kind of tried again, and then the Mamu, Rajon Tucker, Lindell Wigginton core just couldn't pull it out.
Keep disrespecting TA. I dare you.
I thought about just naming all six players. That there was only six guys who actually played. Drew plays 8 seconds and gets 300K, which it's good work if you can get it.
Yeah, for sure. Just extrapolating that to like yearly income is ridiculous.
Is it? Do you think it's still like? Is that still less than Musk if you average it out? Do you think?
I don't want to think about that.
I don't either. Sadly, it might be. But Drew Holiday try to do that all the time, and then you could be the richest man on earth. I
Even
think
even LeBron was saluting his ability to secure the bag, which was funny.
I think we can all agree if Drew Holiday was one of the world's wealthiest people, we'd all be better off. Although it probably wouldn't last long because he tends to give away a lot of his earned income because Drew Holiday rules. Okay, enough of that. Before we get to the interviews, gotta say, Brewers pulled out a very needed victory today. Go subscribe to Cruisin' for a Bruisin', spelled like Brew Crew, Cruisin' for a Bruisin', GSPN's Milwaukee Brewers podcast with Adam McGee and Andrew Snyder, the newest full-fledged host on GSPN. We're growing, Rohan. It's very exciting.
It's only fitting that at the beginning of last playoff run we formed GSPN,
Yeah.
and now as the playoffs are beginning this season, we're expanding GSPN. Very happy about that. Make sure you check out Cruising for a Bruising. Great content from them. I'm even following baseball now because of
Same. Yeah, I'm all in. I was out and about yesterday. Just go, damn, come on, Woodruff, get it together. And this is like peak Bucks. Well, not peak, but like right before a peak Bucks run. So, maybe I won't be able to follow every game during the Bucks playoff run, but you can bet as soon as that ends, I'm going to be all in on the Brewers, man. I think we're both going to make appearances. I'm excited to hear yours. I think you're going to have a lot of MLB The Show input somehow. That'll be fun to hear, but it should be good. But enough baseball, enough other stuff. Let's shout out our great guests here and let the people know who they are going to be listening to. We split up for this so we could cover more ground because we wanted to kind of get a good idea of all of the teams that we think are the premier in the East. So there are three other teams that finished with the Bucks in the top four: the Heat, the Celtics, the Bucks, and the Sixers. And then we also had to cover the Nets. As much of a wild card as they are, as much as people probably don't believe in them because they're what, ninth right now or 10th? No, eighth.
seven.
I don't know why I thought play-in started. I
They're
knew
seventh
they
in
were
the
top half
East.
of the play-in. They're seventh. They still have KD and Kyrie, so we had to cover them as well. So we split up. Rohan, we want to let us know who you talked to first.
So with the aforementioned Nets, I talked to previous guest of the podcast, Matt Brooks, at Matt Brooks NBA on Twitter for great analysis. And then for the Sixers, I talked to another former guest on the pod, Jackson Frank, who covers all things Sixers and all things NBA in general. Ty, who did you talk to?
So for the Boston Celtics, who The Bucks were maybe ducking, maybe not, I guess we're flip flopping with that team to maybe or maybe not duck the Nets. I talked to Tom Westerholm of the Geno Time podcast, writes for Boston.com. He's first time guest, but we were very, very happy to have him. Great stuff from Tom. And then to cover the Miami Heat, I talked to friend of the show, David Ramil, friend of the show, no friend of Bucks Twitter, which I think is mutual. But
maybe he will be now.
Yeah, maybe we can all relax. And also, I raised emoji. But so in order, you're going to hear Rohan talk to Matt, me talk to Tom, Rohan talk to Jackson, and then me talking to David. So we're switching it up. You'll get their perspectives on their team's season, how they match up with the Bucks, how they guard Giannis, who will win a potential series. This is our chat with all of the contending teams' coverage folks, and of course we will dive in deeper when if the Bucks are matched up with these teams later. But we just wanted to cover the whole field and just get a good idea of. I think it was interesting how people covering other teams, I should say, evaluate the Bucks. It was pretty interesting.
It is very interesting. And also, last thing before I get into it, these were recorded before we knew seeding in general. So we recorded this before we knew that the Bucks were going to be the third seed and facing the Chicago Bulls. So if there's any discourse to the contrary of what's reality, that's why.
Just focus on the strat talk and less on the it's shaking out like this currently talk, because things tend to change a lot. I think still great relevant conversations we're excited to share. So starting off, here is Rohan's convo with Matt Brooks.
Okay, and now joining us to talk about all things Brooklyn Nets and a potential series with the Milwaukee Bucks is Matt Brooks. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back on. Very excited that we are concluding the regular season. It's been a weird year to watch and cover the Nets. So excited that we're like getting into the play-in, getting into the playoffs, assuming the Nets make it through. It's an exciting point of the year. I live for this part.
Yeah, and as we are recording this, it's seeming likely that we might actually get a Bucks-Nets first-round series. So we might have another pod coming with you later. Stay tuned for that if it happens. But for those who are unfamiliar with what has been a tumultuous season for the Brooklyn Nets, to say the least, can you give the people a quick summary of what's happened so far this year?
All right, I'm going to try to not mention anything about mandates and vaccines, because that I just don't know if my brain can handle any more of that. No, tumultuous is a good way to put it. Here we are at this point of the year. The Nets have, I think they've had Kyrie back for 28 games, and I have no idea what this team is. That's the best way to describe it. Like they are still. There's still quotes coming out. Steve Nash had a couple quotes last night about how they feel like they're still in training camp. There are times where they look like it. This has just been a team of a lot of instability. They had James Harden and no Kyrie at the beginning of the year. Harden forces out. Kyrie comes back probably a month after, and now there's this strange team that doesn't have Ben Simmons on the floor. Seth Curry's running around. KD's carrying the team. Kind of. It's been a strange year, and it's really, really hard to get a good get a good gauge of like who this team is.
Yeah, it's strange. We have no idea. Do you think Ben Simmons is out? He's not playing.
I've been under the impression that he's not playing, like pretty much since the trade happened. Yeah, which is awkward.
Yeah, because I remember the initial reporting around it was going to be, he's going to come back when KD comes back, but then there's the herniated disc issue, which is obviously you don't want to mess around with back injuries, especially with someone of his age and his talent level. But it's just a wild ride of a season for Brooklyn. Just absolutely wild. James Harden's gone. Like I still don't believe that actually happened. Like the big three, the biggest theoretical big three of all time, is done. It happened. It's over. Ben Simmons is on the team. What's going to happen with Kyrie in the offseason? Because he's definitely never said that he's going to sign somewhere and then not sign in the past. That's never happened. But I'm sure he's going to stay. I'm sure he's going to stay with KD.
Yeah, he'll stay. I think that's pretty locked in. But even those two, like you watch them play sometimes and you're like, I don't know if this is necessarily necessarily like the perfect duo here. Like it's just like that synergy isn't completely there yet. So they'll have a bunch of years most likely to figure that out and work through those things. But yeah, I mean, I'll say this, like, I'm sure no Nets fan wants to hear this, but man, this team misses James Harden. Like even this year's James Harden, like, and James Harden misses the Nets right now, like watching him play, which is sad. Everybody, that trade gets made in February where, he goes to Philly. And, there are people saying, oh, I think both teams won the trade. Both teams got better. I actually think both teams lost the trade, honestly. Like, I can't look at either team and be like, well, definitely in a better position now. It's just been such a strange season.
Yeah, just a superstar trade where both teams are sort of like, wait, what happened here?
What did we just do? Kind of, in a way. The Nets are like, wait, hold. I mean, to be fair, like that situation got pretty bad. I think they were just happy to have it done with, in a way. But you're bringing in a guy that has back problems at 25 and has had problems pretty much since the bubble, even dating back, I think, a little bit in college. So you do that. That's your main ship from that trade. And then Philly's got to be looking at Harden being like, we have to pay him what this offseason? Like it's an awkward thing. It's a real awkward situation that these teams have both put each other into.
Yeah, as Ty likes to say, tour date shooting numbers for James Harden are back, which is it's interesting to say the least. But let's say, and like I mentioned, this is looking likely. If the Bucks and Nets are indeed going to be playing in the playoffs this season, what matchups are you specifically looking towards in a potential series? Like, what matchups do you think dictate a series?
The first one that comes to mind is Kyrie and Drew. I just like Drew did such a good job against Kyrie the last time these two teams played, and Kyrie's looked a little off since coming back full time. He got reinstated. Reinstated? Like this was whatever. I'm not getting into this. Since he was brought back full time, that was March 25th. He's had, I think, only one game. I looked this up today. Only one game where he shot over like 50% from the field. So he's been pretty off since playing. He's shooting, I think, 38% from 2-point range. His rim frequency is way down. I wrote about this in a big column that I put out today. So he's just looked a little bit off. And I think if that stays and holds true into the playoffs, that becomes really interesting because that's like they need Kyrie to be on to take on this Bucks team. And I think Drew is somebody that's gonna take that matchup on, and has done that historically. Has done a pretty good job at staying with Kyrie in the last 2 years at least. So I think that's the big one I'm watching. And then whatever the Nets can do to slow down Middleton. I mean that was a big factor for them last year. Bruce Brown looked pretty good in that matchup at certain points. He looked pretty good actually in the game that the Bucks and Nets played. I think he blocked his 3-point shot once.
Yeah, Chris got his jumper blocked like 4 times in that game. We were watching that on playback, and it was just absolutely wild. We never see a lot of Chris jumpers blocked, but Bruce Brown was doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, Bruce has been like on a tear with blocking threes recently. I'm not like completely sure how he's doing it, honestly. So yeah, that's a big one. And then I think. At the end of the day, like I'm sure I know we're going to touch on this a little bit, but like the Giannis question always looms large.
Yeah. I sent you this question beforehand. Like, who do you think on this team is geared to be a Bucks killer? I'm going to amend this and say you cannot say Kevin Durant. Because Katie's obvious. We haven't talked about Kevin Durant yet. He's obvious. He is inevitable. Yeah. He is a player we saw last postseason. He is definitely capable of killing any team. Just his combination, his size, his shooting, everyone else. He's probably the greatest offensive player of all time. No one has a shot. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say Wes Matthews is the key to this series because he's going to be an innings eater on Kevin Durant. Like, sure, yeah, he'll be a defender on KD. Is it going to make that much of a difference? Probably not. Yeah. PJ Tucker was lauded for his defense on Kevin Durant, and KD still went for like 50, like 4 times in that series. I'm not going to sit here and say that the Bucks have an adequate answer to stop Kevin Durant because no one does. So not Kevin Durant, who's a Bucks killer on the Nets roster. Like, who's geared to attack Milwaukee's defense?
I mean, probably Seth Curry. I think that's probably the best way to to go about it. Now, granted, I think that like Drew's like the key to this series for me. I like just holistically in terms of A, he's going to guard Kyrie, but B, he's like, I just love any guard that can post up. And Drew being able to like, he did that, I think, twice against the Bucks the last time, or against the Nets last time these two faced off. He posted up Seth multiple times, and like, if they can survive and if the Bucks can survive and like shut down Seth on the other end, or do as good of a job as you can do, and you're also like posting him up and hunting him on the other end, that's going to be really big. So I think Seth, because he's such a dynamic shooter and can create a little bit, he's a guy that can like do things on the second side. I'm going to pick him. But I also recognize like there are ways for the Bucks to attack the Nets when he's on the floor.
Yeah, I was gonna say Seth Curry as well. Just the Bucks have struggled in recent years against, like, Drew is obviously, he's a fantastic perimeter defender, but just in general, this Bucks team has struggled to really stay with a lot of shifty, dynamic guards, and especially one with the shooting ability of Seth Curry. The way they use him off motion, the way they use him sometimes as a lead ball handler, I think he could potentially be a problem for Milwaukee, especially if they're going to be switching a lot of their defensive coverages. Because we know last year, they sent a lot of different looks at Kevin Durant. Like, Drew was guarding KD for here and there. They just wanted to keep sending different guys, not giving him the same looks every time down the floor. So when Drew is not guarding a guard, who's on Seth Curry? Is it going to be Chris Middleton? We know they've used Chris Middleton to guard a lot of shifty guards in the past, going back to last season, like Duncan Robinson against Miami. They stuck Chris on him, and it went decently well. Chris is their de facto guy for motion guys, but Seth is a little different. He's more creative than that. He's definitely more dynamic. So that's going to be very interesting to see. And just guard play in general, just how are they going to be able to stick with a guy like Patty Mills? Is Patty Mills going to shoot I know he's struggled.
Is Patty Mills what is Patty Mills going to do? I would not put my faith in Patty Mills right now.
Here's the thing with Patty Mills.
But he's a gamer. He's a gamer in the playoffs. So
exactly. Plus, it's like, if the shot is on, you're going to get torched. We saw it in the opening night against when these two teams faced. It was just I think
he was 7 for 7.
Clinic. Yeah, 7 for 7. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think
that feels like ages ago.
Yeah, it definitely does. The guard play is going to be very important. But just besides just a singular player, I think I hinted at this already, but how is this team really geared to attack Milwaukee's defense? How are they geared to really abuse what Milwaukee is giving them?
It's got to be from the 3-point line. Because I think what the Bucks they give up the most threes in the league. Is that stat right?
They're at the top. Yeah.
Okay. So that's obviously got to be where it is. Now, the Nets are not a team that has been high in terms of 3-point rate. A big part of that is that, especially since making the Harden trade, is that they don't have anybody that can, get into the paint, essentially. Like, they really don't. Kyrie's around, I think, 11 drives per game. KD's, they're both actually having career lows in rim frequency this year. So they don't have a guy that can like get into the paint, create from there. Like, this weirdly feels like a series where Goran Dragic becomes really important, which is not a sentence I thought I'd be saying at the end of the season. But here we are. So I think that's probably the way you have to do it, is you have to put your head down, especially if you're Kyrie, and try to kick to the corners and try to find those reads from there. But yeah, I think that's probably the biggest exploit. Now, I will say, I thought the Bucks did a great job, especially in the final minutes. I think it was the fourth quarter of the last time these two teams played. They just did such a great job of running the Nets off the line. I brought up Seth Curry a second ago. I think it was Giannis, maybe. I think it was Giannis who like ran him off the line and then like guarded like 3 players, and I think like defended his 3-point shot at the very classic Giannis thing. But it was just kind of, they were very the Bucks were very attuned to that. So it'll be important for the Nets to like apply that pressure throughout the entire series and really play the variance game that way.
Yeah, I think the rim pressure you bring up is very important, because the Bucks, as we know, they're geared to stop players who go to the rim, and if that's not their thing, you can definitely attack them from beyond the arc. We've seen that a lot of times over the years that Coach Budenholzer has been here. It's just a lot of it's a lot of live or die by the three sort of mentality on the defensive end for Milwaukee. You bring up Goran Dragic, which is it's funny because this potential series has a little bit of fun interplay between some players. We had Javon Carter on our pod as soon as he signed with the Bucks, and he didn't say this outright. He did not say this outright. I don't want to start anything, but it seems like not very happy with the Brooklyn Nets. And
No.
It seems like just his Twitter activity, his family members' Twitter activity. I think they're looking for some revenge out here. Especially they take they're pretty happy knowing that Dragic has struggled at times with the Nets. So there's a potential for some rivalry, some revenge there.
Yeah, and he was shooting the heck out of the ball at the very end too. So like it just really it's just such a strange start to the year for the Nets. Javon kind of starting slow, Bruce not being in the rotation, Bembry getting all these minutes. Like there were just, I don't know, things have fallen into place, I guess, for everybody, but very weird start, I think, for everybody. Yeah, that's cool. You guys had him on though. That's awesome.
Thank you. If he was playoff eligible, I would have bet that the Bucks would have tried to sign James Johnson after he got waived, because that's just that's the pattern. Sign Bembry, sign Carter, get James Johnson here.
You don't want that. You don't want that.
I know. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of James Johnson. His nickname is Bloodsport. You will never hear me say anything bad about James Johnson in my entire life.
I am terrified. I would like to amend that statement. James Johnson was great.
Yes, thank you. That is my mentality as well. But no, unfortunately, James Johnson is not playoff eligible, and we got Rayshon Tucker, so that works out. But okay, let's talk about the Nets defense a little bit here. And that is a can of worms right there, the Nets defense. So just generally, what are your thoughts on how Milwaukee can fare against this Brooklyn Nets defense, and specifically Giannis?
Well, Giannis is going to eat. I think that for me is like this. They just apply so much pressure on the Nets, and Giannis especially. They just make them work. The Nets were. The last time these two teams played, the way the Nets were double teaming Giannis, especially when he posted up, was just like so bad. Like the double would come and he'd like be looking directly at it. You know, they'd either do it like right on the catch or like it was just, there's just no nuance to the way the Nets defend a lot of the time. And they have a bunch of small guards. Like they played the Knicks the other night and their closing lineup. And granted, they were plus 15 in these minutes. Also playing the Knicks in crunch time. Let's just would like to put that out there. I think they're 30th in crunch time offense, or actually crunch time net rating. But the Nets ran out KD at the 5, Bruce Brown, Patty Mills, Seth Curry, Kyrie Irving. Ton of firepower. Don't know how that would fare. Actually, I do know how that would fare. It would not fare well against the Bucks. Like Giannis would be like, awesome. This looks terrific. I think Giannis is taking, in the moments that he's matched up with KD. He attacks, he goes straight to the rim because KD, KD's a good rim protector, but he doesn't want anything to do with that, man. Like he just doesn't. He at times he'll do like the Matador defense, or if it's even a slight bump, he'll kind of like move out the way. It's just, I don't know. I think that's the way they're going to do it. And the more you're forcing like the Nets to play bigger, I actually think that helps Milwaukee because, the Nets playing bigger doesn't necessarily mean they're better. I think we saw that in the very first game of the year. They were running these lineups of like LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin together. And it's like, those are just that's losing minutes. That's bad. Like just because you're bigger doesn't mean you're better. And the Nets were still getting killed on rebounds and stuff like that. So I think that's the way they're going to do it. It's going to really, I think it's going to play the same way it did last year, where the Bucks, if they can take advantage in pretty much all of the, extra categories, forcing turnovers, rebounds, transition, like they're going to beat the Nets in that pretty much every single night. And that's how they're going to win this series. It's the uglier it gets, the better, I think, for them.
I think the key for the Nets playing bigger is probably going to be Andre Drummond, realistically, because we've seen in the past, like Andre is like, he's not given Giannis like a ton of trouble, but he's played him well. He's like in my opinion, he's the most capable Giannis defender on the Nets roster. And that's like, he's not bad. He can still move fast. You gather rebounds. He's big too. So that helps. So what do you think? Do you think Andre is going to be the key there?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's their guy. And then I would say probably Blake after that. Claxton just has gotten like.
Does Blake exist?
I don't know. And I like, by the way, I don't agree with it just being like, hey, we're going to dust off Blake after not playing for, 2 months and being like, hey, we're just going to throw you into this series. I don't understand, how they've handled Blake, which like, I think there's like a subset of Nets Twitter where it's like Blake is this like idealized version where it's like, all right, let's temper our expectations a little bit. But I do agree with the idea that he should be playing. So I guess that would be their backup. Claxton just, I don't think it's a good matchup for him. Not only he gets weight roomed by Giannis, but he also he got weight roomed a couple of times by Drew. Like I just don't think it's a great matchup for him. So yeah, I think that's probably what you're looking at. And Drummond will be good. The conditioning always worries me a little bit with him. Especially with the way the Nets switch, they'll have him switch out onto a guard. And then it's like, the Nets are sitting there like, hey, Andre, we need you to go grab the defensive board. And he's like, I don't want to do that, man. Like, I don't know how big he is. What is he? 200? I don't even know. 270 or something like that. I'm not good with weight, so that could be completely wrong. But he's a big dude to be running around switching and then trying to fly in for boards. So I mean, I think there's limitations to playing him as much as they're probably going to need to. But that's probably the reality of where they're at.
Okay. Second to last question here. Who wins this series if they do end up playing?
I think Bucks in 6. I just don't like this matchup for the Nets at all. And I know there are Nets fans that are feeling optimistic about it, that are saying, well, we had this big advantage, 2-0 advantage at the beginning of the series, and KD almost won the series. And like, I hear you. I get it. Bucks are in a very different place than they were last year, where the Bucks were kind of just beating themselves in large part for especially the early portion of that.
Mental breakdowns.
Yeah, just bad. And like the Bucks now, like you watch Giannis play and it's like, oh, like this is that leap. Like this is the leap that you saw, so I don't like LeBron make, where it's like this guy won and now he's being like, oh, I'm this guy. Like this is what I can be. And I just think like you watch them play, and that game that happened the other week, it was like the Nets were shot something 48% from 3 in that game. And the Bucks just didn't seem mentally bothered at all. They're like, that's fine. Like you guys are going to cool down and we're going to make our run at the very end. Giannis like took the ball full court and just like ran into 3 people and drew a foul on Claxton. Like that's the way the Bucks are going to play. And I think because they have such a designed game plan where they're going to muck it up kind of in a way. Because they have that, and that's something they can do against the Nets. And they even, that's the identity that they frankly found at the end of that second round series last year. I think because they can tap into that and they can channel that game after game after game, I just think that's more sustainable than how the Nets are going to have to win.
Yeah, I think the Nets, it's just going to be like, can we just run them off the court, just like pure offensive firepower. Yep. And then the Bucks are going to be like, okay, if they can get out of their own way, which is what scares me, are they going to have some like PTSD and just absolutely go back into their old selves? Because that's what we saw in like that most recent matchup. I was losing my mind again because I was like, they're doing the same things over and over again in the first half of that game, and I was like, oh my god, they're going to do it again. I do not want to see this in the postseason again. But I do think the Bucks win the series. I think it'll probably be 6 or 7. I think they make it closer than it probably needs to be. But especially because the Nets have that fellow named Kevin Durant on their team, they're always going to have a chance. Like basketball, there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of things you can analyze, but it's also simple in some respects, in the sense that if you have one of the most talented players of all time, you have a chance.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's it'll be, I mean, the KD factor is huge. I think Bucks fans will notice this. Like the Nets are a little clunkier this year offensively. Like they just have weird record scratch moments where the synergy just doesn't fully
guys
appear
out of position,
there.
Guys out of place.
Yeah, I mean the spacing's bad, but it's even just like possessions where it's Kyrie and KD. Like let's say KD, screens. Well, Kyrie screens for KD. Like that action should be really potent, and it's not always potent. Just the synergy between those two can kind of feel off. It's a little my turn, your turn. So, we'll see if the Nets can sort that out. But I think Bucks fans will notice that, like, for as good as this Nets team is offensively, and for the way that they're trying to win, where they're really just going to try to blow you out with offense, I do think there are going to be those moments where you're like, that looks kind of odd. Like that's a weird possession for them. They've had a lot of those recently.
Yeah. Okay. Last question here. Where can the people find your work?
Follow me, Matt Brooks NBA on Twitter. I'm Matt Brooks NBA on YouTube. And then, subscribe to the Clear Out podcast, Brooklyn Nets podcast with Blue Wire. All on my Twitter though. Like I'm good about posting my stuff. So if that's a whole bunch of information that I just threw at you, just follow me on Twitter, Matt Brooks NBA. Everything's there.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the analysis. We might be talking to you again real soon. And
I hope so. I hope so. I need that series like I need water, man. It was so good last year. I want it again, man.
It'll be good. It'll definitely be one of the best first round series in recent history.
In a while. Got to be up there. I mean, that's got to be up there for sure. So I'm excited for it.
For sure. Thank you again, and make sure you check out Matt's work.
All right, now talking Bucks Celtics with Tom Westerholm of the Geno Time podcast, covering the Celtics as well as other Boston teams. Tom, how's it going?
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
I'm good. I didn't clear it first. Did I nail the last name? Is it as it looks?
Yeah, it's just as it looks. I think it's Swedish for. It's really powerful. It's Swedish for west of home.
Oh, okay. There you go.
You know.
I mean, you are west of Sweden right now, so I guess I guess they were right on with that one. So moving on to Boston and the Bucks, I want to start here. If you could just kind of give me, the abridged summary of the Celtics season. I think pretty obviously a team that had a dramatic turnaround after the first month or two. But how would you kind of sum up where Boston is at heading into the playoffs?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the Celtics season has been an odd one. They they started just abysmally. They looked exactly like last year's team, which was just awful. Which is funny because a lot of the pieces from last year's team that were awful were elsewhere, right? Like Tristan Thompson was gone. You thought that they would be just fine, but they kind of looked like the same team. And about halfway through the year, they got all healthy. They got everybody back in the lineup, and they all claim that was the turnaround, that the big thing, all they needed was to get healthy. And that after that, everything's all set. I'll be honest with you. I don't know how much I believe that. But it just like it lines up from a narrative perspective. And yeah, since then they've been, I think, if not the best team, then the best non-Suns team in the NBA. Like they've been just obliterating everybody. It's hilarious to look at their crunch time stats because they haven't changed since the start of the season because the Celtics don't play crunch time anymore. They just beat the hell out of everybody and kind of move on with their lives. So, I mean, it's been a very weird season. I think there are plenty of unanswered questions about the Celtics heading into the playoffs. Like when there are actual crunch times, are they still going to be this good? I don't think they're going to beat everybody in the playoffs by 25 points, but I mean, they're really, really good. Jason Tatum cementing himself as a top 10, top whatever you want to call him player in the NBA. Jaylen Brown looks awesome. Their defense is nasty. They're going to be a lot of fun. They're going to make a lot of noise in the playoffs, I think.
Yeah, they certainly are. I think, it's so funny how the playoff picture has kind of shifted for the East as the year has gone on. And I think the Celtics certainly emerged as probably not a favorite or the favorite at least, but certainly very much up there on the list of nobody wants to see this team early teams. And that's not bad. And I think unlike the Raptors, who I think are also there, with the Suns, I think there's more of an expectation that they could realistically beat anyone. Whereas the Raptors, I think, would have a shot against any team, but I don't think they're quite on that same level just now. I think, the Suns, the Celtics and the Bucks won't play round one, which may mean that there's more shot for Time Lord Robert Williams to emerge in a Bucks-Celtics series. Before we get to talking about those are the matchup specifically, what do you think the timeline is for Robert Williams as we record, with the game still to go for the Celtics, but on Sunday here, but obviously he's not going to play in that game, probably not in the first round, but what have you been hearing about Time Lord?
Yeah. So the general timeline is that if he does play in the first round, it's actually bad news for the Celtics because it means their first round series has gone longer than they wanted it to. Sure. So like if you look at the timelines, he could, like there's a world in which he plays in game 6 or game 7 or something like that. But again, if you're the Celtics, you're really hoping it doesn't get to that point. So I think obviously the hope for the Celtics is that he comes back, start of the second round. They are able to, work their way through these teams without him. And, frankly, they should be able to. They're like, obviously, you never know if they end up playing Brooklyn in the first round or whatever it might be. then maybe it is a tougher first round series. But they have a great defense. I mean, Al Horford is really, really good. So even without Rob, they should be okay. But yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, if there is a second round series, that's when you start being like, okay, it sounds like, he got his meniscus trimmed, and it was not a very serious meniscus issue, not a very bad tear from the sound of things. The Celtics keep characterizing it as kind of a best case scenario in terms of, a meniscus tear. So that's the good news. And it does sound like, assuming they get through the first round, he should be, around for, if not the first game, then soon after in the second round.
Yeah, you certainly hope so. I mean, if the Celtics are going to win or lose, I mean, I just everyone at full strength for this playoffs would be awesome, and very much unlike last playoffs. So hopefully we get a healthier run from every team. But shifting gears to Bucks Celtics. I mean, we've seen these teams have some weird games this season. Not a lot of fully healthy games between the two teams, but if they are matching up in the second round, it'd probably be the second round. It seems like they're poised to be the 2 and the 3 right about now. What matchups do you think would dictate how that series goes? I mean, it's tempting to start with Giannis, but I mean, when you look around and both of these rosters, what could be the swinging point on a potential positional matchup?
I think it is fair to start with Giannis, right? And to say like him versus Horford, just because those guys have always had major battles. And I'll be honest, coming into the season, I thought Horford was washed. I thought that there was like, that bringing him on was kind of a nostalgia thing, like get rid of Kemba, get that contract off your books. It has not been that. Al Horford has been a huge contributor on the Celtics again. And I think that him versus Giannis would be really fun. Giannis is obviously better than the last time the Celtics and Bucks played with Al Horford in the mix. And, the Celtics are also better because the last time they matched up was the time that Kyrie decided to take it on himself to guard Giannis in the playoffs, which was still one of the wilder things I've ever seen. So I think that's the number one for me, obviously. And then I think after that, I don't know that the Bucks have much in the way of an answer for Jason Tatum. So I'm curious how they, how they start to approach that. And then I think just, the Holiday versus whichever Celtics guard matches up against him and how that plays out. I mean, he's been so good this year. Like, I'm fascinated to see how that plays out. But the Celtics guards, they got bigger at the trade deadline by going and getting Derek White. They got tougher defensively. Like, the Celtics do not have any defensive holes anymore. And Milwaukee has a bunch of guys, who are really talented. Giannis is himself. Chris Middleton is Michael Jordan whenever he faces the Celtics. Like, there's some, there's some real, like kind of the immovable object versus the
unstoppable force. Yeah,
that's the one. Yeah. There might be some of that going on with Giannis and Chris Middleton being the unstoppable forces, and then the Celtics being the immovable rock. I really hope we get that second round matchup. I think that would be a lot of fun for that reason.
It seems like it is poised to be a pretty tight series. I think for matchups wise, it wouldn't shock me, by the way, if we see Drew on Tatum to start and maybe Wesley Matthews on Jaylen Brown. I don't think that would surprise me very much at all. It'll be interesting to me to see, really, I think Chris Middleton, who you mentioned has been such a Celtics killer, really has had an up and down season. Like, I think clearly Drew has been better this year despite who got All-Star and who didn't. And of course the Bucks are going to need all three of their top 3 guys to be really good no matter what. But I think, if Chris can have a really strong two-way series, and I don't think the Bucks will use, it won't be Drew on Tatum for a whole series. They like to throw waves at star players. Like, how good can Chris be when he's taking a Tatum shift, a Jaylen Brown shift, defensively while still being a plus on offense? I think that's a huge swing piece for the Bucks, just because Giannis is probably going to get his one way or another, even against what's been the best defense in the NBA. Even if Time Lord is back on that back line, he's Giannis, man. There's just no stopping him. We see games for the Bucks come down to, how present are the other guys, right? Is Chris at 25 or is he at 18 on 15 shots? So I think Chris's series is going to be really big. And also, if the Celtics throw lone bigs in lineups at Giannis, how much impact can Brook Lopez have, posting up, doing whatever else? So I think those two I'm going to look at specifically. And also, I was going to say a player's name. Let's see if you figure out who I was going to talk about. Next question is, who do you see as a potential Bucks killer on the roster? I think this guy was a Bucks killer in the last game. I think all Bucks fans are worried that his 9 3-point attempts games will have the most makes against the Bucks.
Smart?
Yeah.
Did he make 9? Okay, yeah.
I think he made
yeah.
7. I think he made 7 or so in the last game. But, it's one of those where I think Bucks fans joke like, oh, it's great if Marcus Smart takes 9 threes. Like, unless it's against the Bucks when he's probably like 8 of 9 or something.
Well, I mean, I will say that Bucks fans are 100% right that in general, the Celtics' best games are the ones where Smart takes 3 shots and has 11 assists. I mean, this season, he's had a lot of those games where he has just been a super, distributing point guard, an absolute killer defensively. And, but he barely takes any shots. That's crucial for the Celtics because every 32% 3-pointer that he takes is a possession where the Celtics aren't, usually anyway, where the Celtics aren't running a pick and roll for Tatum, forcing the switch or forcing the trap, which Tatum has been passing out of LeBron James over the last few weeks. His passing has taken such a huge step that you want the ball in his hands. You do not want that possession to end with a Marcus Smart 3 in general. I mean, often, what does happen is that defenses break down and then the ball swings around and it's like somebody's getting an in rhythm 3. Maybe that guy's Marcus. So in general, though, I think Bucks fans are 100% correct. If you get, and I think, whether there's magic for Smart against the Bucks or not, he's the guy that you want shooting the most if you're a Bucks fan watching the Celtics.
So is Tatum the Bucks killer then? Is that too obvious, or I think it might be
everybody killer?
Yeah.
He's that's been the I think the cool thing for the Celtics this season is that Tatum has just morphed into this MVP candidate, right? I think you look ahead at the next 2-3 years. You assume Giannis will be in the conversation every year. You assume Jokic will be in the conversation every year, Embiid. And I think Tatum is on the verge of I think he's there. I think if he has a full season like this one, he is an MVP candidate too. That's it. I think that's going to be the really interesting thing about these playoffs is we get our first chance to see what MVP Tatum in the postseason looks like, So, yeah, I mean, the whole Celtics offense revolves around Tatum and then also Jalen, drawing these double teams, moving the ball around. They play team basketball now. It's just crisp pass basketball. And that all starts with Jason Tatum. So, there will probably be guys who get hot. There will probably be guys who, have a good night here or there. But in general, it's you guys get it. You guys watch Giannis every night, right? Everything revolves around that one superstar. And yeah, if other guys get hot, great. But it's the one engine kind of driving everything.
Totally. So it kind of segues nicely into my next question for you here, which is, how is this team geared to attack Milwaukee? And I think now the Bucks are a lot different now than some of the earlier games in the season. Now that Brook is back, they're going back to dropping more. We'll see how much they can do that against Tatum in some of these pick and rolls for sure. It's not easy, especially if Time Lord is back and healthy and catching lobs over the back if Brook is up too far to contest the jumper. But I remember Bobby Portis, probably his worst game of the season might have been earlier against Boston when they're all switching and Tatum just gets him over and over and over. And it's just, I love Bobby Portis, but he was getting full aid by Jason Tatum. So how do you see the Celtics attacking Milwaukee? Is it, that just high pick and roll and either getting the switch and letting him cook or taking advantage of the drop scheme, either giving him or the big too much room?
Yeah, I think it'll be a combination of those things. The fact that the Bucks give up so many threes is, I'll be interested to see how that plays against the Celtics because they do have some games where they just go icy cold. That does happen every once in a while. And you get one of those in early in the series, it can completely swing things, right? That's how you end up maybe 1-1 instead of 2-0 or 0-2 instead of 1-1. Those things can happen. So, right. I think you'll see a ton of pick and roll. You'll see, a ton of trying to force those switches and a ton of ball moving around to the perimeter. I know the Bucks are pretty steadfast in trying, not to give up buckets around the rim. But I am curious, do they ever come out of that if a team is hitting threes? Because the Celtics are gonna be happy to chuck up threes. They got a lot of guys who can do it. Grant Williams has come on as one of the best 3-point shooters in the NBA from the corners this season. They have guys who can shoot. Peyton Pritchard's been hitting ever since the Dennis Schroeder trade. Will they be comfortable just kind of letting the Celtics chuck them up, or are they going to kind of come out of that, do you think?
I think they're going to come out of it in specific games. And one trend that we noticed, obviously, the Detroit game, they just kind of rolled Detroit. They're not playing anyone today against Cleveland, but the Celtics game and the last couple games before that, notice Brook Lopez not playing a ton in the second half of some of those games, despite having quite the impact. I mean, his offense has really come alive for the first time since he got healthy this year. And I think that's because they're going to more switching, more hedging, and trying to take away some threes. And I think especially against Boston, it wouldn't surprise me to see that, even though I think, Brook is lined up to do some work against Boston. I think he's going to have important moments in that series. It wouldn't surprise me if we see him play a little bit less against the Celtics, because this is a team, it seems like, I don't know. I mean, it's not that they don't get to the rim, but it's certainly a team that's going to shoot a lot of jumpers. And I can see Brook's role being a little less important in some of these games, and whether it's Bobby Portis or if he's having trouble. I think they've gotten better at scram switches and not just they used to switch too easily. I think especially in that game I'm talking about with Tatum earlier, like they just gave the switch every time. I think they've gotten better at fighting to not leave him on an island as much, but I think certainly we could see the Bucks go a little bit smaller in this series. Giannis at the 5, and that's why it's nice for the Bucks that they found Wesley Matthews. The contributions he's been able to give them. We'll see how healthy George Hill is. That could be big, but those are like their switchable options, and more Pat Connaughton too. It wouldn't surprise me if to see more of that later in some games in this series. Even though everyone loves Brook, Brook is really important. Maybe the rim isn't the most important spot against every team in every situation.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be interesting because I think, if Brook gets dragged out at all, and Rob is back, that's one of the ways that the Celtics just like annihilate teams is, they get all these switches, they get all this passing. And so they get all these threes, and eventually the defense just, kind of starts to wear out. And as soon as you do, the big isn't dropped back far enough, and all of a sudden it's lob to Rob. Because I don't know if Draymond Green had Jason Tatum on his podcast recently, and he was pointing out it's not even on the pick and roll that you can be even with the big in the roll. You have to be behind him at all times, or else Rob is going to dunk on your head, and he might dunk on your head anyway. So, I think that I think will be crucial for the Bucks. Is you might give up some buckets around the paint. Rob might get 10 points on 5 shots. Like he does that, but it's going to be the threes. It's going to be just kind of the ball movement and trying to contain that, figuring out a way to not let Tatum just annihilate you in the pick and roll. Those I think are going to be the ways that the Bucks can, maybe try to slow down the Celtics as opposed to, the packing it around the paint and kind of daring the threes.
Yeah, I think we've seen that with teams before where the Bucks will really lean into picking their poison, right? And saying, hey, maybe Time Lord scores 12 on perfect 6 for 6. We're going to make it really hard for Tatum to get to his 30 on whatever shooting, or Jalen, or whoever it is. Yeah, so that would not surprise me. So on the other side, I mean, you mentioned Horford doing great work and hopefully Time Lord in the back line, but, got to talk again about Giannis, who obviously is everything else matters for the Bucks too, but nothing matters, without Giannis down low. So what do you think Boston's game plan is going to be to try and slow down Giannis in a playoff series?
Yeah, I mean, if I knew the answer, I'd probably be getting paid a lot more than I am. But I do think that Horford is I think that's going to be Plan A and might be Plan B, right? Like it might be maybe if everything else breaks down, you start trying to throw Smart at him every once in a while, just because obviously Giannis is so good when he gets ahead of steam. Smart is pretty good every once in a while at kind of sliding in front of somebody who's got ahead of steam. Like he's really, and actually Derek White too. Derek White's almost leading the NBA in charges taken this year. So both those guys, especially Smart, is willing to kind of stand in front of a freight train sometimes. I do think in general, though, it's, they've used Grant Williams at times. Grant, the interesting thing about Grant is that usually in the first quarter of a game against like a star player like that, he'll get dunked on a couple of times, or he'll kind of get tossed out of the way. But he does kind of figure out how to kind of really get down low, and he's a strong dude. So, he can be troublesome for guys sometimes. He gave Embiid a couple of, some problems every once in a while. He gave Jokic some problems this season. So he's a really, really strong dude. And that can obviously help some against Giannis. It's the problem with Giannis is the same problem with Tatum, is the same problem with any of these super duper stars. It's just like, like they're going to do great things, and that's why we all love watching them so much. So, I'm sure the Celtics will put a lot of responsibility on Horford, and beyond that, I mean, if he's crushing Al Horford, I don't know, man.
It's tough. It's tough. Yeah,
it gets tough. Yeah.
I noticed you didn't talk about Time Lord, and I assume that's not just wanting to kind of protect him off injury. Is this kind of like a Miami Heat situation where they have the great defensive backline guy like Bam for Miami, Time Lord for Boston? I know Miami likes to keep that guy on the backline, right? Like they prefer to guard Giannis with more of a wing or someone else, and then always have that strong help defender. Do you see that as being Boston's plan too?
Yeah, so the Celtics do that with Rob. The other thing they do with him is he can come out and kind of switch too.
Sure.
So if there are guys who are like sometimes he'll drop, sometimes he'll kind of hedge. He does actually a lot better than he used to. He used to be just an abysmal pick and roll defender. He's gotten so much better. So yeah, I mean, you're looking at him as kind of a drop guy, as kind of that help side guy, and as a pick and roll guy. But as far as Giannis goes, I mean, that would be a really tough matchup for him. He just doesn't he doesn't move the same way Giannis moves, So yeah, I would not expect a lot of Rob on him. I mean, and you said setting aside injury stuff. I think not setting aside injury stuff.
Yeah,
I think that's part of it too. Like Giannis is a very physical dude, and like if Rob's coming off a meniscus tear, like you're hoping that if you're the Celtics, you're hoping you beat the Bucks, and you're hoping there's another series after that where you also will need Rob. So yeah, I think all of that's going to play into it. I would not expect to see much Rob on Giannis, but I don't know. Ime is smarter than me, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and it's sometimes you need all the options you can get for guys
right.
like that too. So then last question, simple one. Well, maybe who wins the series?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's a simple one. I mean, look,
it's the shortest one I've asked.
The shortest one, right? Yeah. The simplest one for you to ask. I understand. Yeah. I mean, look, I think I would probably pick the Celtics if Rob is healthy. And it's. To be honest with you, I would pick this as the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't have much faith in Philly. The Heat are tough, unquestionably, but I think these are the two best teams in the Eastern Conference. I think the Celtics have been the best team in I think the East for the last few months, and I think there's a lot of repeatable stuff in what they do. Right, like their defense is awesome. Their offense has been the best offense in the NBA for the last month or so. They feel like a team that's really coming on at the right time. Now, I'm certainly not willing to guarantee anything because of Giannis and Middleton, but I do think that the repeatability of the Celtics defense combined with what Tatum is doing and how what he is doing has influenced everybody else on the team, to me feels like a potential championship team, or at least a team that gets through the Eastern Conference. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree in that I think Boston is right up there with the Bucks this season. I think the Bucks win.
Okay.
I've come to a point where, and this is true for close games, for series, for entire playoff runs, I just won't bet against Giannis. If things are relatively close,
respectable.
Yeah, I've just seen him do so much stuff that just shouldn't be possible at all. So I'm just gonna say that he figures it out. He figures out Horford or Smart or whatever else he needs to. They do just enough, and I have enough trust in the periphery guys, right? Chris and Drew to an extent are the first guys you mentioned, but I think this Bucks team is deeper than last year's team where they had to play Teague and stuff. So. I think I'm going to favor them in every series, even if teams like the Celtics, the Suns, that really I think have shown more this season and have really just been these well-oiled machines. Certainly a scary proposition to go up against, but I'm still going to take the Bucks. So I think we're both doing the right move and saying, hey, you know what? Team, we're sitting here, we're watching all year. We know what they can do. We're taking them. That makes sense. I won't begrudge anyone for doing that.
Well, I think we're both doing the same thing where it's I'm not gonna begrudge you for picking Giannis, and I don't think you're gonna begrudge me for picking Tatum and the Celtics. So it's man,
I get
that. We're a pretty good team. I don't
know. Absolutely. Sure. Well, that's awesome, Tom. Unless there's any other last notes you have, that's all I had. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk Boston, Milwaukee with me.
Yeah, man. I hope it happens, man. I want to see that series. That is the Eastern Conference series that I want to see. I really it looks like we're on our way to it. So
yeah, I mean one of these two teams probably has to beat the Nets. Maybe we'll see what happens. Maybe they have to go through Miami. But I do think as scary as KD to a lesser extent Kyrie is, I would favor either of these teams to beat Brooklyn and meet. So hopefully it happens. I agree with you. It'll be fun. Although, anyone like myself maybe who was cheering for an easier Bucks path, probably not getting it, but hey, that's okay. You got to beat great teams to win a championship.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thanks again, Tom. Appreciate it, man.
Of course, man. Appreciate you having me.
Okay, and now we're here with one of the best in the business, Jackson Frank, here to talk to us about Bucks Sixers. First of all, Jackson, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm ready for the playoffs. I feel like I feel similarly to probably all these players, much less physically taxed, but I'm ready for something new. So I'm excited to talk about some playoff series. The playoff previews are here, so I'm ready to dive in and talk some Sixers, Bucks, and whatnot.
Okay, so first off, let's just get a little primer on what the Sixers team has been doing this season. Just give the people, in case they don't know what's been happening, what's a quick summary of this Sixers season so far?
Yeah, obviously they played with the first, through the All-Star break without Ben Simmons. He was holding out for a number of reasons. Somebody said mental health. Earlier was said he just wanted to get a trade. And they were pretty good through the All-Star break. Embiid was playing at an MVP level, as he continued to do afterward. They acquired James Harden midway through the year. He started playing right after the All-Star break. They were great out of the gates, 3 blowout wins. He was very good. Since then, he's been a little more inconsistent. Still had some really, really great games since, but hasn't been as smooth sailing. They've had flashes of great play on both sides, some great defensive games, some great offensive games. I think back to the one right before the All-Star break when they beat the Bucks. They were great in that. They're great offensively. They've had some really good games against the Heat defensively and the Bulls, but they haven't really put it all together. I think they're 9th or 10th in defense this year and 13th or 14th in offense. So a lot of inconsistency. Haven't been able to rely on anyone besides Embiid consistently beyond maybe George Niang off the bench and Tyrese Maxey for the most part. That's kind of where they are. They have some really nice wins. They've beaten the Grizzlies, the Warriors, the Bucks, the Nets. They've got some bad losses. They lost the Pistons last week. They've lost a couple of times the Raptors without Fred VanVleet and OG Anunoby. So really just inconsistency is kind of the theme for them, and they've been able to kind of work through that because Joel Embiid's put together an MVP caliber year, and here they are, on the cusp of a 50th win. Depending if they split at least their weekend series against the Pistons and the Pacers.
Quick aside, who do you have as MVP so far?
Right now, I think I was asked a couple of days ago. I have Jokic and then Giannis and then Embiid, but I really have no issue with any order. I think the whole narrative, the whole discussions have been a little exhausting, so I've stayed out of it. But they're all having great years, and it's really fun because they're all different players. It's not like it's 3 scoring guards or 3-point forwards, but that's the way I would go. But I've really kind of flip flopped it. You could have said Embiid a month ago, but I kind of lean Jokic just given what he's done with the offense and the defensive improvements and how he's buoyed a team that's been without second and third best players. But Giannis has also been great. I think inconsistency would be a fair label for a lot of the Bucks this year. So I think what he's done, and the growth he's showed offensively, especially, has been really cool. But you really can't go wrong, and it'll be cool to kind of see what happens when that's announced in the next month or two.
I think that's a good way to go about it. Just enjoy it. Enjoy basketball. It's not that difficult. You don't have to make everything into an insane argument. You don't have to disparage other players. You can enjoy greatness. And all 3 players are putting up historically dominant seasons. This is good for the league. It's good for basketball. Just enjoy it. I think that should be the main takeaway. But getting to a potential Bucks Sixers series in the postseason, that's what we're here. That's what we're here to talk about. Let's say these 2 teams face each other. What matchups do you think are going to dictate that series?
Yeah, so I think the match, and I kind of went in a different route. I think how the Bucks handle the Harden and Embiid pick and roll is really going to determine things. You'd imagine they throw Drew at least in the guts of the game on Harden like they did last week. And he had some good success. But that's kind of been their bread and butter in terms of maximizing them together. Embiid can do what he does on his own really well, but Harden's long-standing kind of aversion to catch and shoot threes, it kind of makes him a tough release valve, on those Embiid post kickouts and whatnot. But that Harden pick and roll has been really good, for most of the year. I shouldn't say most of their tenure together. 2 months, roughly a month and a half. But you saw early in that Bucks game when they had Giannis on Matisse, and Giannis is that roamer, and he's making things so tough for Joel in the role, and Harden's a passer. what that can do. But then they take Giannis off of Matisse and things open up a little bit, and Joel has more room to maybe work as a face-up guy or as a roller. So I think if that's something that the Sixers could consistently tap into and really kind of find success with offensively, they would be in a good spot. But if Drew does his thing at the point of attack and navigating screens, and Giannis is, whether he's in drop or he's trapping or he's playing the Roma roll, or Brook is in drop, and I think Brook's been really impressive defensively since he came back. If they're giving him issues, then you run into problems, because you can always just go to Embiid in the post or in the face-up stuff and trust that he'll make something happen. But if you're trying to maximize this star duo, that's the best path. And so if that action's neutralized, they're in a tough spot. It's a lot of, a little bit my turn, your turn stuff. And usually it's going to be Embiid's turn because he's just a better self-creator than Harden is at this stage right now.
Yeah, going back to that recent game, we saw a lot of Wes Matthews on James Harden in the early stages of the game. You mentioned during the guts of the game, it's going to be Drew Holiday because that their best perimeter defender. So I was really looking forward to seeing that matchup just to see how Wes Matthews sort of navigates that, because he's like, on this Bucks roster currently, he's like the innings eater defensively. He's been a guy matched up on KD. He's been matched up on James Harden. So we saw in that recent matchup, you just see a lot of Wes Matthews just like trying his best to give James different coverages, sort of like, there was one possession where he just like quickly darted under a screen because he knew that Harden wasn't going to pull up, and Harden was like, "Oh, I dare you to try this again. Let's try doing this again." And then they just completely shifted coverages mid-play. So it's going to be really interesting because, like you mentioned, that's going to be the thing that dictates any series with the Sixers, because those two players are so dominant. Just any actions involving those two are just going to be super, super crucial for the Bucks or any other team facing the Sixers to really match up against. But if we're talking about attacking the Bucks from a Sixers perspective, which player on the Sixers roster is really most geared to get the newest title of Bucks killer?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think for me, it has to be Maxey. He has been so good all year. Basically all year has been awesome, but especially since the Harden trade. Wasn't great against the Bucks, had a nice little flurry at one point, but I don't think he was great overall. But he had 8 threes against the Pacers the other day. He had 22 against the Raptors. He had an explosion against the Heat, against the Cavs. And as good as the Bucks defense can be, I do kind of I don't think they have that kind of speed to kind of slow Maxey, whether it's attacking off the catch or working off dribble handoff, and a guy goes under and he steps into that step back three that he's become so good at this year. I think that's the guy for them. I think Harden's going to do what he can do, and even though he's been inconsistent as a scorer, he's still been awesome as a passer with the Sixers. Setting up Maxey for a lot of stuff. Embiid obviously can kind of tilt the defense and let Maxey do his thing in the gap. So that, for me, I think it's Maxey. Tobias, Tobias feels a little more fickle in terms of just, is a three ball going down. He's been a lot more willing to take those threes the last month or so, and that's been important. But I worry about him kind of trying to attack the length the Bucks will have in a closing lineup with Giannis and Brook and whatnot, and kind of the way that maybe Drew or West could bother him when he attacks with a stunt or with those digs. And so for me, it's Maxey. I just think that's the guy for them, and he's been just so good. And there's obviously a big difference between being a really good second or third option in the regular season and being that in the second or third round of the playoffs. I think so. It's going to be huge for him. He got some experience last year, but I think he's that guy. Just no one can really contain that speed, and the fact that he's shooting, I think, 43.5% from three this year as well. It kind of seems like he's more comfortable, or he's comfortable with even more kind of types of shots from deep than maybe he was even 3 months ago. It makes it really tough to stop. So that's the guy for me. And I don't think he's kind of the litmus test for the Sixers, but I think you could see if they face Milwaukee in a series or someone else really good, that he could kind of be, I guess, the X factor, which is cliche, but it's true. I think Harden's kind of the litmus test for them. They kind of go as he goes, because what you're going to get from Embiid. He's just going to be sensational basically all the time. But Max is the guy that you could kind of feel like it's tough to have. It's tough to have the perimeter defense to contain both Harden and Max. Harden, can be a little more fickle based on the shot making, but you got to be really well equipped to contain both of them. And I think obviously you're going to prioritize Harden more, and rightfully so. But Maxey can really give you issues if the jumper's falling and he's hitting those scoop layups and floaters and whatnot. So I think he would kind of be the guy that you wonder if the release foul that he is could really kind of give Milwaukee some problems.
Yeah, Tyrese Maxey's the reason why I thought after this the Harden trade that the Sixers had the second highest ceiling in the East, hands down. Because not only do you have two absolute dominant players in Joel Embiid and James Harden, but your third option is a guy who's just been coming into his own all year in Tyrese Maxey. And like you said, if he's the escape valve, that is a very, very good escape valve to have, given that the season that he has had with the Sixers. It'll be interesting to see how the Bucks defend him in that matchup we saw last week, whenever it was. We saw Drew start on him. Then we saw Chris sort of wander over his way when Drew started to take bigger assignments. It'll be interesting to see if the Sixers use him more as like a guy off motion. That'll be interesting because Chris has sort of been that guy to really stay with guys who are just going to be running around the floor a lot, which is very interesting to me, even though he's done a decent job like containing guys like Duncan Robinson, for instance, last year in the postseason. Chris is not the guy I would think of when I think foot speed and just like keeping up with guys, but they make it work somehow. So we'll see how that goes. You mentioned that the Bucks have a staunch defense. It's fallen off a little bit in terms of actual metrics this season, but there's still a pretty solid defense. They have all of their core pieces back now. But teams are capable of finding holes. Where do the Sixers sort of press at the seams of this Bucks defense?
Yeah, I think it still starts with Embiid. He, maybe 2 years ago, I would really worry about this matchup for him, just given the fact that the Bucks could throw Brook to match the strength, and then Giannis is the roamer. But now, like, because he's kind of evolved his game to be this guy off the dribble and the face-up stuff and the transition, it's not Giannis stuff in transition, but you see some of those coast-to-coast plays, different style, but same result. Not the same result, but you know what I mean. Obviously, Giannis is Giannis in transition. I don't want to say otherwise. But it starts there, and so Brook has been, like, from the games I've seen since he returned the last 3 weeks, has been really impressive defensively, but he doesn't have kind of the level of mobility and foot speed and strength to match that. Giannis is great at what he does, but he doesn't have I don't think he has the level of strength. Maybe he can compensate with the length and the flexibility, but the way that Embiid can really kind of suck that Bucks defense in, especially because the Bucks like to stop the paint, they like to cut off the rim. Embiid is so good at those kickouts, whether it's a no look or like one step and he gets the defender leading his way and then boom, it's a kick out or finding a cut or things like that. I mean, we saw that's what the Sixers did when they beat the Bucks, earlier this year back in February. They ran a bunch of face-up stuff. They put 4 shooters around Joel, and and obviously Brook didn't play that game, but they gave the Bucks defense a lot of issues by just collapsing the paint a lot. So that's where I think it would be the fact that the Bucks are going to want to close off the rim, but Embiid isn't this guy who like has to thrive with 60% of his shots to the rim. And so you kind of play off that and you find kickouts to Danny Green, George Niang, Tyrese Maxey. James Harden, like I said, isn't a great catch and shoot guy, but he can still do some stuff off the catch. Tobias Harris has been much better as a quick trigger catch and shoot guy the last month or so. So that's where you got to go. I think that's kind of what you do. And especially in the minutes that, if there are any minutes that Embiid's out there and one of Giannis or Brook isn't out there, you really got to press that because the Bucks aren't super big. We saw that would be an issue when Brook was out this year. So that would be kind of, you really got to see what happens there in those minutes. But you wonder, are the Sixers going to try and stagger? You're not stagger. Are they going to match Embiid and Giannis? Because we saw what happens when you don't put Joel Embiid on Giannis. He goes for 40 and, leads his team to come back win and scores 15 in 4 minutes or whatever those ridiculous numbers were against Paul Millsap. We'll see. They played Paul Reed against Toronto. I don't know if it was a matchup thing, but obviously Paul Reed isn't going to stop Giannis, but maybe it's a little better than a Paul Millsap or DeAndre Jordan, maybe marginally so, but also might not matter. But we'll see. I think it would really be kind of hammering home those minutes where maybe the Bucks aren't this large and humongous team inside like they are during Brook and Giannis's joint minutes.
I'll never doubt B-ball Paul. Never doubt B-ball Paul. But you mentioned that the lack of size from Milwaukee without Brook is concerning, and that's really my concern too. In the sense that if Brook gets his way into foul trouble, which is very easy to do against Joel Embiid, the next guy up is going to be Bobby Portis. Joel Embiid is going to eat Bobby Portis for breakfast. He's going to eat him for breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever time they're playing these games. And this is maybe why you get a guy like Serge Ibaka on this team just as an insurance policy, but I don't know if he's going to make much of a difference either. We saw him in sparse minutes.
Yeah, and I would say that was when Embiid kind of found his rhythm last game when they threw Ibaka out there. Embiid started slowly, I think, and then they threw Ibaka out there and he drew a couple fouls and a couple of face-up buckets. But yeah, it's tough for sure.
Yeah, it's looking back, that trade makes not a ton of. They did get picks back, and I get you're not going to pay Dante, but like, I don't know, it didn't work out as well as they wanted it to. But I guess you can't find better third center options than Serge Ibaka, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could have just kept Boogie, right? I mean, it seemed to me
it's preaching to the choir.
It seemed to me the idea there was like they wanted a defensive-minded center, but Serge at the stage is an offensive-minded center, just like Boogie is, and so. And the offense wasn't the issue when the Bucks have had their faults this year. The offense has looked incredible for most of the year. So yeah, that was a weird trade. And I don't know, it was weird. Obviously, Dante's in a tough spot. He didn't look great, when he came back, but also he hadn't played for 8 months, and he was going back into a team that was trying to figure things out on the fly. So yeah, but I didn't love that either. I just didn't get kind of the vision because it almost just felt like a misunderstanding of who Serge is at this degree. He's still a fine player, a backup guy, but it's offense. He's not the guy who averaged 4 blocks a game 10 years ago or anything like that. It's just not his game.
Yeah, literally 10 years ago. That's what we're talking about at this point. But yeah, it's just the frontline defense is what's gonna be key in the potential series. And let's say this potential series happens. Who's winning this?
Yeah, I gotta go Milwaukee in 5 or 6. I just think they're better.
5 or 6?
I mean, the Sixers have been so inconsistent since they traded for Harden, and it just feel that they kind of go as he goes. He's not their best player, of course. And I know that like the narrative with him has been obviously weird. Like he's still been a top 20-ish, 25 guy this year. Hasn't looked great all the time. There's certainly some times where I don't enjoy it, but the passing is still great. He's still drawing a ton of fouls. He's still scoring 15 to 25 a game. He obviously was great against the Bucks. But they're just too inconsistent. The defensive communication is really weird. Like this, we're supposed to switch a lot of stuff, but it's not everything. And I don't quite understand that. The offensive schemes are a lot of it's just like we have Joel Embiid, James Harden, and Tyrese Maxey and Tobias Harris, and that's about it. It's not a lot of system stuff. So I just don't trust them. I know Milwaukee's been inconsistent, but Milwaukee is the reigning champs. It has earned the benefit of the doubt. I feel less worried when they lose to the Celtics down 3 starters than I do when the Sixers lose to the Raptors down, I think 2 starters yesterday with VanVleet and Anunoby. So I just think they're a lot better team, and that could change based off the first round series. We'll see, but I just have more confidence in the coaching staff with the Bucks. I think obviously Bud made huge strides in the last couple of rounds last year. Doc is the guy he's been for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. No blown lead changes him. He's got that mental fortitude, for better or for worse. Obviously, in this case, for worse. So I just don't trust the Sixers. I was high on them after the Harden trade, and even after the first few games, they've had some good wins. They beat the Wolves on the road, and the Wolves have been playing really well. Beat Dallas. Dallas been playing well. Obviously, they came within earshot of beating the Suns and the Bucks. But just too many games, like losing to the Pistons and losing to the Raptors and squeaking by a Cavs team down Allen, Mobley, Rubio, all these guys. And so I just don't. I think the inconsistency is kind of their identity, like I said at the start. So I would go Milwaukee in 5 or 6. I could see 7, but I think
that's where I would lean. I would lean probably 7, but maybe I'm just too trepidatious to really make like a concerted pick. But I don't know. I think the Sixers team is the second best team in the East. I think they could definitely, they have a chance. They could beat Milwaukee. I think they could. I don't necessarily think they will, but I'll say Bucks in 7 because I think it would be close.
Yeah, I would love that. I mean, I think it's funny. We're coming from 2 different sides here, right? Like you watch every Bucks game and there are inconsistencies. I watch every Sixers game. I know there are inconsistencies, and maybe you're underrating theirs and I'm underrating theirs. And so it's one of those tough parts, but yeah, I think it could go. Like, I think I wouldn't be shocked if the Sixers won the East or anything like that, but they'd have to play like Harden have to play like he did against the Bucks, and they would have to have a game like against the Mavs and even against the Suns. Like they have to play like that all the time. And I just don't trust it. And then they'd say the fact that like, they're just such a coaching disadvantage against all these great teams, maybe beyond, I mean, I don't know what you consider the Nets, but maybe beyond that. I mean, Ime Udoka's done great this year with the Celtics, and obviously we know what Bud can do, and we know what Spoelstra can do, and Nick Nurse, and so like I've watched this Doc team basically every game they played the last 2 years, and I don't feel great that he's going to make the necessary adjustments in game and all that, and so it's just tough for me. But hey, you got a guy like Harden who can make every pass in the ball. he can make a lot of the passes in the book. And Joel is a great scorer, and we know what Joel's done in the playoffs offensively the last few years. You're going to have a chance. So we'll see, but I just can't quite get there. But you could ask me with somehow maybe this miraculously becomes the 2-3 matchup, and we're talking 3 weeks, and maybe the Sixers have dispatched whoever they played in the first round easily, and maybe I feel better. But for now, there's too many consistencies. Like I said, flashes of brilliance, but you got to have that brilliance for 4 straight games against a great team like Milwaukee, and I just worry a little bit about that. But I would love for it to go 7 and have some really, really fun games, but I'm just a little more skeptical. But could certainly be wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things in the season with the Sixers and whatnot, but we'll see.
We shall see indeed. Jackson, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us here at the Eurostep. Where can the people find your work?
Yeah, so you can find my Sixers content over at Liberty Ballers. My general NBA stuff, a bunch of playoff stuff going over at Basketball News, The Analyst, and Dime Up Rocks. Then you can follow me on Twitter at JackFrank_JJF, tweeting all sorts of videos and analysis. So excited for the playoffs, and hopefully we get a fun series like this with the Sixers and Bucks that go 7. Hopefully you're right and I'm wrong.
Hopefully. Thank you. Absolutely one of the best in the business, like I mentioned up top. Jackson Frank, make sure you check out all his work.
All right, and now to talk about the Miami Heat, another team the Bucks will not be playing in the first round this year, which is probably good for us both. But here with David Ramil to talk about Bucks Heat, the Heat, and just this team that has been, I'd say, probably Milwaukee's biggest rival, or at least one of them in the last couple of years. And we'll see if we get to break the 1-1 tie over the last 2 times they've met in the playoffs. But David, how's it going?
Pretty good so far, Ty. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, just got a couple questions to run by. I think this first one will be an opportunity for you to feed me some crow, because I want to ask you to give me the, quick couple-minute summary of Miami's season heading into the playoffs. And, of course, I was on your podcast, talked a bit about what I thought the Heat would be, did not think they would be all that good. You have a better recollection than I do, purposefully, of exactly what I said. But the Heat obviously have locked up the 1 seed going into this last day of games, so they've had quite a strong season heading into the playoffs. But how would you break down Miami's year?
It's been challenging, and at the same time, they have absolutely surpassed expectations in terms of like how they've dealt with injury and roster turnover and everything else. And of course, this isn't just something the Heat has to deal with. Every team in the league has to some extent, but they've missed significant amount of time from Jimmy Butler. Bam Adebayo had surgery in December, missed several weeks of basketball. Kyle Lowry's been in and out of the lineup due to personal reasons. And, they've been trying to incorporate Tyler Hero and a fairly new roster of players, including PJ Tucker. And somehow the one constant has just been them finding a way to win. And they've gotten a lot of production from guys that nobody expected to be significant contributors, including Caleb Martin, who was waived by the Charlotte Hornets. They sure could use him, and he's turned into a great defender and 3-point shooter for Miami, Max Strus, et cetera. So their bench has really stepped up in the absence of either Jimmy, Kyle, or Bam missing some time, and they just continue to win. Erik Spoelstra has done a really good job of maximizing this roster and getting them to play at the right pace with a great, clear identity of who they are as a team. And yes, as far as eating crow is concerned, I think 44 wins was your max for this team. I think you hovered around 41 games, excuse me.
Yeah.
And they're hovering around 53, 54 with the end of the season on the line tonight. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I'll take the L. And I think really what's maybe most surprising or most impressive is some of my predicted issues with the Heat did happen, right? I mean, there were, I think, some spacing issues in the games when the big three, I guess you would say, all did play, plus PJ Tucker, who cooled down after being the league's best 3-point shooter before the break, which seems like it could be significant heading into the playoffs. But I think it's really, Spoelstra, who I don't think is being looked at as a favorite for Coach of the Year. And I get that a lot of guys have had great seasons, but I think he should probably at least be top 3 of every ballot, the kind of season that Miami's had. But, I mean, maybe the Heat should just get, like, Player Development of the Year. That's not an award, but, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, Caleb Martin have all given teams nightmares this season. Tyler Hero looks better than ever. I don't know why. It's Hero. I don't know why I keep saying Hero, but I got to put some respect on that man's name. He's had a tremendous season. So, yeah, I think it's been a wild kind of – I don't know if this is the way anybody would have predicted their season going. I mean, I think certainly, Heat fans thought they would be this good. I just don't know if this is the reason. But acknowledging all of that, heading into the playoffs, they've got one. The Bucks will be 2 or 3. Not entirely sure as we're recording, potentially 3. But either way, wouldn't see the Heat until the conference finals. So both teams would have to go through some tough opposition to get to a third matchup. But if that does happen, what matchups within Bucks Heat do you think could dictate a potential series if these two teams meet in the conference finals?
Between a Bucks Heat series, what matchup I think would be the one most likely to define the series is Drew Holiday versus Kyle Lowry. That's the one that I see.
Exactly what I was thinking as well.
Yeah, as you recall from last year's series against Miami, obviously the Bucks had an answer for everything that they did offensively. They didn't have a significant contributor other than Jimmy Butler, and the defense keyed in on what he could do. He's sending either Giannis or Holiday or somebody else to attack Butler on all occasions. His jumper wasn't falling. He wasn't able to get to the line as much as he does during the regular season, et cetera. And they just had no answer for what Milwaukee could do offensively as well. So while some of those games felt like they were close, in reality, Milwaukee dictated the pace completely. Having said that, you go and acquire Kyle Lowry during the offseason specifically for this reason, is because he can contend with Holiday to some extent. His three-point shooting has been incredible over the last 3 months. Since February started, he's been shooting 47% from three. He's been very, very good. He's just getting into a comfortable groove. Even with all the time that he has missed on and off, he's still finding his way here, and he defines so much of what Miami can do in terms of playing with pace, playing with intent, pushes the ball up with those outlet passes of his. He always seems to have an incredible understanding of where the defense is, et cetera. And, of course, he's great at drawing charges and everything else that he did in Toronto. So between me, my thinking is that if he can hold his own against a player like Holiday, or even maybe dictate a game or two within a series, that's where the matchup really lies. That really could change things in favor of Miami.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Holiday Lowry being a big one. And I think the Bucks have obviously suffered at the hands of all-time Lowry playoff performances before. I think a little bit of it's again. I think Bucks fans would be pretty confident as a whole going into this series. Although that's one of those matchups where you never feel great. I think about playing Kyle Lowry, even if you say you do. I think in the back of your mind, you're a little bit afraid, knowing that seems like one of those guys who can always turn back. I don't know if turn back the clock is necessary, but really, tap into his best.
He just does what he does. It's just so weird. Like even recently, like I had Katie Heindel, who covered the team in Toronto, and Kyle for a long time on the show, and she was just talking about how like he slowly ramps up over the course of the season, and it's like his output doesn't even feel like he's not going to go off for 50 or anything like that. He might not even approach 30 on a game-to-game basis. But he just hits a big shot, takes a charge, plays a little defense, makes the right pass to a player, and all of a sudden, you were down 7 or 8, and now you're up 5. And it's just like that's the kind of contribution that he makes, and it's like it feels more subtle, but it's definitely noticeable over the course of a game.
Absolutely. I think my runner-up matchup in this series particular would probably be Bam Adebayo versus Brook Lopez, and I think. Bam obviously at this point in his career is going to be the better, more productive player, but Lopez was as important as anybody versus the Heat last time out, the way he was really able to put a chokehold on the paint and just not let Jimmy or Bam get comfortable there. And I think this series, maybe more than any other series, even including obviously if Bucks run into Sixers, Lopez is going to be really important there to do his best with Joel Embiid. We'll see. They're probably going to have to go through the Raptors, who do a really great job defending Embiid. We'll see what happens. But I think Miami is another series where you would expect Lopez to, maybe have as important of a role for the Bucks as he will against any team. So I think
Bam has always had a problem with Lopez's height and length, et cetera. Like he becomes less of a player whenever Lopez is out there. And that's 100% honest. I think even Bam would admit to that. But we've seen a different version of Bam this year where he's a little bit more aggressive, and you wonder whether or not he's going to be able to contend with Lopez and that the challenge that height and length presents for him or has presented for him in the past, because I think this is a better version of Bam than what Milwaukee has seen in past series.
Yeah, and I think I still get roasted from time to time by Rohan and Adam on our network because I got in this big argument when we were drafting Olympic teams that Bam's mid-range game is better than they give it credit for, and he just really what he is, but he didn't shoot many, wasn't that comfortable, because something I say about Brook too is he's like deceptively long. And I think
Oh, yeah.
they don't switch him much, but when he is guarding someone who's going to shoot, even the elite shooters in the league, nobody is comfortable shooting over Brook Lopez because he's just so towering. It's hard to see over the guy. So I think that too would be a crucial one. See how if Brook can be that good again, that's a huge swing for the Bucks.
But with Lopez going in drop coverage, Bam's going to have that 15 to 18 footer,
Yeah.
and he's been willing to take it this year. So
Yeah.
I think we saw him slowly ramp up last year. We even saw some progress the season before when they were in the bubble. But this year, I think he's just much more comfortable. And if he can get, if he can at least fake the shot and get Lopez up in the air and drive past him, well, then it's kind of over because he finishes at the rim at such a high level. So we'll see. It's an interesting matchup. Both of them really are.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really, you could dig into, I think probably 6 in this series, but I think those are 2 of the better ones. Oh, this is a dangerous question. I could see this going a lot of different ways too. But if you had to identify one Heat player who you view as a potential Bucks killer on the roster, who would you pick out?
The one most likely, I think, would be Tyler Hero.
Okay.
He is, I mean, it's either him or Max Strus, who you mentioned before, because both of them have been like incredibly ignitable to me.
Yeah.
Like their offense just catches fire. Like you can take Tyler out for a quarter or two, but generally there's one quarter late in the game where he'll catch fire, and he enjoys that moment. He's been, as we mentioned before we started recording, he's been like the heart of Miami's offense on many occasions, which is a dangerous thing to live and die by, but it's been mostly successful, as we talked about too. So I think Tyler just catches fire. But then Max Strus is another guy. He's just recently inserted into the starting lineup in place of Duncan Robinson. And maybe the first quarter he won't score, but in the third quarter he can have 15 points. And that's where all of a sudden it's like a momentum shift takes place with Max just being a little bit more aggressive. He's a great shooter, but he gets to the rim a little bit more easily than Duncan does too. He catches lobs on occasion. He's just willing to attack the paint in a way that Duncan is not. And I think he's a guy who can definitely change things in Miami's favor.
Yeah, honestly, I think those are obviously strong answers. I was wondering if you were going to say PJ Tucker. I mean, I know he's cooled off a lot, but he was so good in some of the runs, like defending Giannis when these teams matched up earlier. And obviously, there's a guy who, if he does play a lot, and we'll see. I mean, Spo has a lot of options rotationally against the Bucks and against any series. With how maybe you're kind of nodding. Some of the young guys have come on strong. I mean, there's a lot of guys who can play at least a bit on this roster. But I think PJ, if he gives you great shifts on Giannis and hits a couple threes, that can be huge. I think the Bucks spent all playoffs waiting for him to hit those couple of threes, and don't know if it really ever happened, but it worked out for them regardless. But not seeing PJ as a Bucks killer this time around.
No, it's just I come not to expect PJ's production on offense. Defensively, even defensively, he's taken a little step back. Like the intensity is always there. There are some good games scattered with some bad games, but offensively, you never know what you're going to get. Like his 3-point attempts have cut down considerably. His 3-point percentage has definitely dropped off a cliff. I've been more impressed with his floater game than anything else. Like he's been much more willing and able to put it down the floor and create offense that way and get to the paint. And he's got a nice floater game that I had not previously seen or did not think it was going to be as potent as it's been. But it's been a real weapon for him and on occasion. But I never expect PJ to score. So when it does, it's kind of like the cherry on top. You'll take it, but you're not going to really go looking for it either.
Yeah, I think Bucks fans could really, really relate to that sentiment.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So looking at the other side of the ball a bit here, how is this Heat team geared to attack Milwaukee? And I think, definitely this is something we've seen when they've played, but expecting the guys like Hero, Strus to be able to knock down some threes, especially the way Milwaukee is going to play defense against this Miami team. But, on a whole team basis, how do you expect Spo and the Heat to try and attack the Bucks, assuming we see a good amount of drop and Brook Lopez out there?
Yeah, I think it's the 3-point shot that obviously they're going to rely on. It's a team that shoots the ball well. They shoot it not as much, but that's been slowly ticking up. And I think that's like this team, man, and as I hate to say it, but the reality is that it's almost like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde because it's just two different versions of this team. There's one where it's really slow and they can't get the ball. They haven't been moving around. You saw that 4-game losing streak recently where almost all of their flaws were exposed to a great degree. And then they kind of flipped the script on that and they won like 6 straight. So, now this is the best version of this team, which you kind of want as they're slowly building towards the playoff where it's, one where they share the ball and they're taking close to about 40 threes a game. And that's right where you want them because they'll make them on occasion. You know, Tyler will hit, Kyle will hit, Strus will hit, Duncan coming off the bench will hit, et cetera. Even Jimmy has been taking threes. And you don't necessarily want to rely on that as a weapon, just like you don't want to rely on PJ Tucker. But when they're spreading the floor like that, that's when you can get Bam and Jimmy to attack the paint, where you can free spots up for Kyle on occasion to get to the line. You know, it's all predicated on their 3-point shooting dictating the terms of the defense there. And once they do that, then they kind of just are able to pick their spots. Great passers all the way around. Jimmy's an underrated passer. Kyle, obviously, Bam. So you've got a lot of great passing on multiple positions there. And I think that adds a little bit of versatility on offense just as much as you see it on defense. So that's that. I mean, that would be my idea for how Miami could take advantage of the Milwaukee matchup.
Yeah, I think that is the option that makes sense for pretty much any team rather than trying to, go at Brook Lopez and Giannis down there in the paint. So would not surprise me at all. And I think that does make a lot of sense. Jimmy being able to hit a couple threes, I think would be really big for Miami. We'll see. I don't know if they need it, but it could be nice for the Heat.
He's just a different player when he's hitting those threes.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw him in the playoffs last year when Miami got swept, and he was just like a shade of the player that he had been in the series against them the prior year. And I know he took a lot of crap from it. He was stupidly locked in. I know I took a lot of crap for it personally. I mean, there was a lot going on there, but just like Jimmy was not he just wasn't a functional player out there. And you have to give credit to Milwaukee's defense for being able to shut him down.
Yeah. I think it's really intriguing to me that he started to shoot him again and hit some recently because it wasn't that he was like breaking all year. He just stopped shooting, for more than a year now. Yeah. So it's that I think is one of those things that is probably going to get overlooked. There's so many other storylines. I mean, is Ben Simmons going to come back? Whatever else. I'm so tired of Ben Simmons headlines for a guy who has not played all year. But that's one of those things that who knows? Maybe could be a big deal for Miami in the playoffs this season.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's swing back to defense. And we talked a little bit about PJ earlier, and I do think that the Heat plan will probably be as it has for a while, which is try to put someone else frontline on Giannis and then have Bam as that backline defender. But, and this is the $1 million question for everyone playing the Bucks right. But is that how you see the Heat defending Giannis, or what is your expectation for how they will try to defend him as a team? I think even this regular season, as well as in the playoffs, and even this, when the Bucks won in 4, Giannis still was not getting whatever he wanted. I think Miami consistently has defended him very well. So would you expect that to hold up in a potential series?
Yeah, I don't see why you'd change it. I mean, you have to kind of force other players to step up, and they obviously have in the past. But I think if you can at least hinder Giannis or make him uncomfortable or don't let him get to those shots that he finds so easy, I think that's the strategy. And again, yeah, it's worked. And a lot of that is built on the fact that you have PJ who can kind of sort of hold his own, but then the fact that you have arguably his best defender in Bam Adebayo. Like, I mean, that's a guy who you could put one-on-one with Giannis, and it's a pretty even matchup, much more even than any other player in the league, I think, when it comes to Giannis. He's a guy who obviously dominates so many other players, but against Bam, a little bit more difficult. Jimmy can hold his own, even Kyle, certainly. From that point forward, then it's kind of like iffy because there's nobody else really on this roster who could really step up and provide the same kind of versatility defensively as those 4 guys. But that's the key right there. Build a wall, et cetera, challenge Giannis. And Miami has done a pretty good job of that in the few past playoff matches to some extent.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see if the Bucks would need to or want to adjust because they've shifted their lineup from all offense to all defense. Obviously, as Brook Lopez was going to get healthy, he was going to take that starting spot back from Bobby Portis. But I think injury has played a little bit into this as well. Grayson has not played in a little while, but now Wes Matthews, the starting 2 guard. And I think you look at, Bryn Forbes obviously was so big in that series, and he didn't need to start to have that impact. But I think Miami could especially be one of those teams where maybe the Bucks lean into playing guys like Grayson Allen, even Pat Connaughton, who's really come on as a shooter more than usual, and Wes Matthews less. It's an interesting balance because you play Wes if you're the Bucks, and you really have like Miami does a lot of the time, no real holes defensively on the roster, on the lineup, I should say, on the floor. But you do lose some spacing. He shot around 34% from 3, really bad in the middle of the year, really good early and now late, thankfully for the Bucks. But I do agree that between PJ, who is a good Giannis defender, Bam, who is both excellent, behind another player and as the primary, Miami does seem poised. And even like if he's not guarding Giannis, Lowry coming and coming from the nail and trying to disrupt, right? Like they just have so many smart, versatile, frankly annoying defenders to deal with that I don't think Giannis will have an easy time. I think we'll see a better go from Giannis. I think he's better now, and obviously in the regular season he's been better and still didn't have that much success. But I think we'll see a different level of intensity, of course. But I would think that that's the concerning part about this series for Milwaukee. You kind of have to rely on other guys more, and it went really well last time, but I'm always more comfortable relying on Giannis than anybody else because, hey, he's Giannis, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Who is the guy who you think is most likely to step up in lieu of Giannis being the dominant scorer that could be the quote-unquote heat killer? Who's the X factor on that side of the equation from your perspective?
Yeah, I think, honestly, it'll be interesting. I almost think it could be either of Drew or Chris or maybe both. Yeah. Two guys who last postseason, they barely got going at the same time. But when they did, the Bucks just look so different. And that's carried over now. I mean, when those guys are all 25-ish or more points, usually Giannis is probably like 10 ahead of both of them, then the Bucks just become so tough because you got role players throwing in some more as well. They just score so many points, the level that they can defend on. It's really tough to beat them. It wouldn't surprise me, though, although I think he's had an up and down regular season, if this is a series where Chris Middleton is getting a lot of catch and shoot looks moving off of Giannis, I think he could really feast. Drew's step back has been great. It was last regular season. It didn't hold into the playoffs. That holding up would change a lot for the Bucks. But I think Chris Middleton is a guy who really should be poised to take advantage of defenses tilting toward Giannis. Obviously, the Heat do it well without tilting too obviously. But even if Chris is contested, he can knock down those catch and shoot threes. So I think Chris shooting hot could be a big difference maker for the Bucks in this series.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that. Although I think Heat fans are probably concerned that Bobby Portis might go off a game or two because I think they have some PTSD from last season about that. He's had a knack for stepping up and hitting big shots against Miami, as has Middleton, no doubt.
Yeah, well, I think that'll be an interesting one too. I think Bobby has earned the right to play more against all teams. I mean, he famously didn't play the last 3 games against Brooklyn. I don't know if that would happen in a potential series this year, but he really did step up. He's really ingrained himself in the Bucks ecosystem and proven himself. So I think he's going to get chances every game to see, is he going to have one of those 5 for 7 from 3 games that can really swing a series. So last one here, the shortest question, but maybe the hardest to answer. Who wins the series? Bucks, Heat.
You're really putting me on the spot here. And honestly, I have no idea. And because I have no idea, I hate to say it, but I have to go with Milwaukee. Miami has just been, Miami has just been a team that has been difficult to predict, not just because of, the missing players in here and there, but even recently when everybody was allegedly healthy and things were, looking like they might be promising, they kind of tanked a little bit and then they sort of just picked things up. And this is, if this is the best version of this team, then, and I guess it's pretty cliche or something that you could apply to almost every team. I think Miami could be pretty dominant in this series. But if it's the bad version of Miami, the Mr. Hyde kind of version, then if that's the case, then Milwaukee could pull out a sweep again. Like that would surprise me more than anything. I don't think it would be another sweep, but it could be pretty close. Miami certainly has a lot to prove. They built this roster specifically to be able to, contend and to contend against Milwaukee this season. So I think, I'd say Bucks in 7.
Yeah, I certainly lean Bucks too for some obvious reasons and some actual reasons. I think just the way that Milwaukee can defend the paint and make it difficult for Jimmy and Bam. Obviously, there's more help now. Tyler Hero's better. They added Lowry. It's going to be so difficult, I think, for those two guys. And I think it's just really hard to win a series when your best players are made to be uncomfortable. So I'm going to lean Bucks as well. I think probably closer to 5 or maybe 6 to be back home in Milwaukee for it. But I am going to lean Bucks. But unless there's any last notes here, David, that's all the questions I've got. And I really appreciate your time, man.
No, I'm surprised that you didn't ask me about Duncan Robinson coming off the bench or Victor Oladipo, which I think has been like the question mark that everybody expected. Like, Oladipo's minutes have been pretty inconsistent. He looks like he's basically out of the rotation at this point. But then when he played just a week ago today against the Toronto Raptors, he had a huge game. It looked like he was dominant, shooting the 3 well. able to get to the rim and dunk with ease, and then hasn't played the last game since then. So it's difficult to see exactly how Oladipo fits into this lineup, but it's been he's another weapon you can bring in maybe as a spark on occasion, but he hasn't figured out quite how to fit alongside Jimmy and Bam, so it can get a little messy in there. So when Jimmy was out against the Raptors last week, that's when Victor started, and he wound up having a huge game. So he's an X factor, just not sure how much of one he could possibly be.
Yeah, I think, Duncan Robinson, it was an odd choice, but, as a fellow podcaster, I don't want to go at him or anything like that, but I think it'll be interesting to see, what kind of an impact he can have coming off.
You guys are both part of the Blue Wire Network, right?
Exactly.
That's right.
We are, yeah.
Wow.
So
your coworker, Duncan Robinson.
I hope he has a great series, and the Bucks just happen to win anyway, is my Duncan Robinson take. But no, it's a good point on Oladipo, I think. It seemed like he wanted to be a Buck. He didn't end up a Buck. Has obviously had a tough year coming back, but will be interesting to see how much Spo feels like he can trust him after not being able to play so much of the season.
Yeah, maybe he's in great shape behind the scenes, but we haven't seen enough to say that he's going to be a legitimate contributor for Miami in a series.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, maybe he checks in and everything changes, but until then, and we'll dive deeper ahead of this if the series does actually happen. But David, thanks so much for the time, man. Really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, man. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, that's all the interviews done, Ty. We went through all 4 of those teams. Hopefully you all enjoyed those conversations. Do you have any closing thoughts here, Ty, as we wrap up this episode?
I think I'm not that upset that the Bucks are not catching any of these teams in the first round. So I think we agree that those are the 4 teams that are maybe the best shot to beat the Bucks, or at least the best ceiling in the East. I don't think the Bulls have a real chance. I'm also not mad the Raptors are on the other side of the bracket. I don't think they're going to make this Cinderella run some people see. But it worked out that we didn't talk about the Raptors because we'll have plenty of time to dive deep on them and their story if they make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. But if they don't, the Bucks don't have to worry about them. But no, I thought it was good conversations with some of these premier teams. And, I'm excited to see how this playoff run goes. I guess just real quickly, do you have any thoughts on 2 versus 3 and the Bucks resting guys against against the Cavs?
It's just, I don't know. It's a rest game because it was their 3rd game in 4 nights. They played the back-to-back. If you're going to tank, you tank against the Pistons.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can tank against the Celtics and really make sure you're not going to get 2.
I think it's more of a they don't care versus they're dunking.
Yeah.
It's more of a we'll face whoever we face, and we just want to make sure our guys are healthy in the playoffs. That's it.
I agree. I think I don't like not potentially having home court in the second round. Although if the Nets do, as everyone's saying, if they rise up and beat a team, they can win 1 series but not 3 series, or whatever else is said about the Nets, then the Bucks do have home court. And if someone manages to beat Miami, then the Bucks suddenly have home court through the whole East. So I wouldn't favor that. I think probably will be a second round series in Boston. Potential Game 7 in Boston is a little scary to think about, but Bucks just have to handle business before a series goes that far.
And they were the 3rd seed last year, and we knew what happened then.
It worked out pretty well. And I mean, a team that we thought was going to be the big juggernaut did not make it to the conference finals. That the Sixers might not make it to the second round. Who knows who's going to make it to the conference finals? But yeah, it's a wild bracket in the East. So I think potentially losing an extra round of home court stinks, but it's probably a fair trade for getting one of the very few, I will say, cupcake first round matchups. Like it's this and the non-Nets play-in team, right? That's it.
Yeah, for sure. Those are the only sort of walkthroughs. I was about to say no disrespect to the Chicago Bulls, but it's very disrespectful.
I mean, it's just facts. I think they had a great season. DeMar's really good, but clearly when they got those injuries, they fell apart. They never put it back together. It sounds like there's going to be a Tristan Thompson mutiny at some point. Hopefully we get to watch that live in 4K during the playoffs. But either way, I think the Bucks can get some revenge for 2015. So that would just leave the Raptors as teams they would need to beat to exact some revenge from the earlier Giannis eras, right?
Yeah, that's it. And we know this team wants to do it. And we'll see what happens as this playoff run unfolds. Let's wrap up. Say thank you for listening to this episode of the Eurostep here on the Eurostep Podcast Network and the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice. Make sure you're subscribed to the Substack, gspn.substack.com. Subscribe to the YouTube, Eurostep Podcast Network on YouTube. Leave a 5-star rating on your podcast platform of choice. Get into the Discord. Link to that will be in my Twitter bio, Ty's Twitter bio, the pod account's Twitter bio at Eurostep Podcast. At Eurostep Podcast? Yeah. I always get those.
Boy.
Confused.
No, you're the one who has to know because I never know.
It's at Eurostep
Podcast. Yeah. Because the email is EurostepPod. Yeah.
Yeah. What was I saying? Yeah, make sure you leave a 5-star rating on your podcast platform of choice. Leave a review if you can. Ty, do we have a review?
We have a good one from Thundernuts.
Oh, perfect.
It's starting strong, but it's funny because the display name is Thundernuts with alternating caps and a dash. But it's a very nice, sweet review. So keep up the great work! ! Point.
I was going to say, don't judge a book by its cover.
That's a great point. 5-star review on Apple from Thundernuts, who writes, "The Eurostep offers Bucks fans consistent and high-quality Bucks coverage. I graduated from college with majors in media studies and Spanish. As someone aspiring to be on air soon, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Adam, Ty, Jordan, and Rohan's content. It has been a really enjoyable experience to keep up with you guys throughout the last few years as you continue to refine your craft and improve as podcast hosts. Thanks for the great content and laughs, Mario."
Oh, that's so
really
sweet.
Nice. And Mario,
so
Thundernuts, if you want any questions, any advice, whatever, feel free to email eurosteppod@gmail.com.
Or
I'd love
hit
to
us up on Twitter. Yeah.
That too. Yeah, whatever works. But I would love to chat. But no, very nice review. Thank you so much. Excited to hear you on the air sometime soon.
Very, very much looking forward to it. If we are the influences, though, I don't know how I feel about that.
It's gonna have to be like a Sirius XM station or something. I don't know if we could be on over the air. I mean, I do short guest appearances frequently on over the air radio, terrestrial radio, as they say. I don't know if I could do full length without like getting thrown off the air. So good luck, Mario. Yeah, I hope you're drawing from more responsible sources as well.
But I'm glad you enjoy our content, Phil, and thank you for the review. Thank you all for listening. Pod Random, and we will talk to you next time.